Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the next session. This is going to be one of my favorite sessions in here. You just heard Enrique talk about actually a whole bunch of stuff. That was a fantastic session, and you heard a call out to identity at the center. Not only because boy, they grabbed a great name back when they started doing this, because it is what the deal is right now, but also about what a great podcast is. I know both of these. I've been on the podcast, I think 5 times. There was one that dropped yesterday, actually, with me in it. So go watch it. It reminds you to come to Identity Management Day. So please do that. Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman I love both of them, great podcasters. We're about to get into the first podcast. And so you know that it's their podcast. You are now going to see their video.
This is Identity at the Center.
Well, thank you for that intro and welcome to the Identity at the Center. I'm Jeff. That's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
I'm doing great.
So here we are, another Identity Management Day. Thoughts?
Happy Identity Management Day.
Happy Identity Management Day. I had to stifle the urge to do like graphics on the screen and stuff like that. I was like, all right, let's just keep it, somewhat simple. I've got new toys to play with, and that's where I was at this morning.
Hey, new toys is always a good thing.
Yes, and I am a gadget and doodad kind of guy. So this is our 5th Identity Management Day. We've been doing this since 2021. We did our first episode, way back episode number 88. We talked with Julie Smith and Kelvin Coleman, kind of learn what IDM Day was all about. And, it's the second Tuesday of April every year. If you want a good time capsule, go back, listen to episode number 88. In that episode, Julie and Kelvin were kind of talking about getting the basics right. And I think we're still there talking about the basics, especially as, new shiny things kind of come along. And at the time, Jim, this is kind of a good time capsule. Shiny things were blockchain and decentralized identity.
Yeah. Well, and I know that I brought up consolidation in the market. A lot of platforms were starting to build more than just one of the major capabilities in terms of IGA, single sign-on, privilege access management, kind of that multi-play approach.
Yep. And we're still seeing, I think, some consolidation taking place today. So I don't think that's changed too much. Basics are still important to get right. This was one of our earliest episodes, and we had already started our lighter note, which is kind of something we do at the end of every episode to kind of have a little bit of fun, show some personality, and hopefully be humorous. We did an evangelist of the year for different things. And Jim, do you remember what you chose to be the evangelist of the year for?
Oh, yeah. Evangelist of taking midday naps. And, I actually realized that my nap game is not quite what it used to be. I used to be able to fall asleep quickly. And that's my problem now is like, I'll lay down and take a half-hour nap or whatever. If I have that space in between meetings, then I can't fall asleep. Or fall asleep like 25 minutes into it.
You got to prioritize. You got to make the time to do it.
That's right.
I remember Kelvin picked, what was it? Dirty martinis and yoga. Maybe not necessarily in that order. Julia was active travel and cycling. And of course, what did I pick? Gadgets, doodads, that kind of thing. So those are kind of our evangelist of the years. Let me ask you a question, kind of start off this conversation. Do awareness days like this move the needle, or are we mostly preaching to the choir? The fine people in the chat, which feel free to drop stuff in. Jim and I will be reading as we go along here.
Yeah, no, I'm going to answer a little bit differently than one of those two answers, which is I think it's an opportunity to sharpen the saw. Take the time to really think about what we do at a strategic level. Attend events like this, or attend this event, and really think about where the industry's heading. So I think it's an important way to build our professional book of knowledge, if you will.
Yeah, I think I mostly agree with that. Any advertisement is good advertisement, good press. Awareness is always important. I think we still see, dollar for dollar security awareness training is still one of the best investments you can make, for an organization, and, helping drive the importance of identity is kind of a big part of that. Who do you think this day is actually for? Is it for practitioners, people who are here, taking part of this? Is it for executives that still need convincing? Is it for the general public? Like, who do you think gets the main benefit out of this?
Well, I think that everyone's welcome. I mean, I think that's true of all things identity, but I think it probably attracts the practitioner the most, people who are, trying to solve real problems in the trenches. And so I think that's who's probably the makeup of the audience. But I don't have visibility to who's actually in the audience, so I'd love to see that. Maybe after the fact. How about you?
Yeah, I look, this is, and I'm one of you. I'm, an identity nerd, literally eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. So, I'm here supporting it. I think it's a great a great recognition that is typically overdue. We do a really bad job of celebrating wins, I think, just collectively sometimes. And today should be a day about winning, and the great work is being done. Let me pivot the conversation into sort of the state of identity as it stands, right now, April 2026. What has improved over the last 5 years since we started doing this? I can think of things like passkeys and MFA, but what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, like it's awareness outside of our industry. I think people now are starting to get how important identity is when they look at kind of the major breaches that occur and they tie back to kind of the basics of blocking and tackling, phishing, social engineering. I mean, the word is getting out there and people are starting to understand that identity is at the center. How about you?
Well, I think it's a great name for a podcast, that's for sure.
We should
um,
do something about that.
yeah, we should do something about that. Yeah, look, it's still the basics. It's 5 years later. We're still trying to make sure that that gets done, not get distracted. I think, authentication has certainly, I think, gotten better. COVID in those years really kind of forced the hand of a lot of companies to introduce MFA if they hadn't done it already. It's kind of a forcing factor. We're seeing passkeys get a lot more adoption for major organizations kind of defaulting it. I logged into, I don't remember what app it was this morning, and it prompted me to create a passkey. It's like, okay, I'm in. And so stuff like that is helpful. What do you think about things that have not improved over the last 5 years?
I think we're still chasing after a lot of things that are done for checkbox compliance. We've heard access reviews are referred to as security theater, and they're not always that, but a lot of times it's you run into this identity management fatigue, and it's where the end users just get piled on, same people to make decisions that are low impact. And I think that's a disservice that we do to users, and it results in I think that's one of the big things that people outside the industry don't understand is that it's a mix of technology but it's also psychology. When we have like recommendations that we don't need to change passwords 5 times a year anymore, it's because the psychology is that people make very incremental changes. They do things, they write down their passwords and things like that that kind of take away from if they did it once a year or once and forget it, then they tend to use stronger passwords.
Yeah, I'm very happy to not have to change a password every like 90 days, 60 days, whatever. But I think there's still plenty of organizations that are following old guidance when it comes to that, where that used to be the guidance, right? Change your password. Breaking news from 5 years ago, you do not need to do that anymore. You should have, appropriate controls in place to not have to change your password that often. We're still dealing with things like credential theft, identity sprawl, least privilege. Like those are all still things that are taking place. Let me ask you another question here. If we had to grade the industry's progress on identity management over the last 5 years, what score would you give it and why?
Well, I think in some respects we deserve an A because of kind of as quickly as things are moving along. And I think things from an identity perspective um, have to support the technology. So it might seem like we're a little bit behind the technology as it moves. That's kind of built into identity. Identity has to support, when we went to the cloud, it has to catch up and go to the cloud. Now with AI, it's like, okay, well, what's going to happen with AI? Identity needs to support that. I think in other respects, we get less than an A, maybe a B or a C, because you and I on the ground, we spend every day working with clients and we see like, okay, well, you can only make so many investments, and these are the areas where organizations trailed or maybe they had budget cuts and they're behind. So I think as an industry overall, we're probably at like a C in terms of if you take the totality. But I think as an industry, in terms of advancements and trying to keep up with all the changes that are happening, we probably deserve an A. How about you?
Uh, I fall more in the C. I think we're doing okay. I think, like you said, some things are better than others, but I think that's okay as well. This is a long fight, a long path to maturity. Not every organization has, billions, trillions of dollars to, dump every single identity and access management tool into their programs and say, oh, that technology is going to fix it. A lot of the problems that we see are people and process. It's simple as that. Really, technology isn't so much the issue anymore. It's how do you govern it and how do you make sure that things are appropriate, for people or things to have access to. I know we can't have a podcast or any talk about identity without talking about Agentic and NHI and all that kind of stuff. So I would give it a C as well, but I don't think that that's necessarily a bad score. I think, look, we're moving along based on market, and the way that the world is working. Could it be better? Sure. Could it be worse? Yep, absolutely. And that's kind of what I'm thinking at right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you made a lot of great points there. Look, if an organization spends all their money on cybersecurity and goes out of business, their cybersecurity posture doesn't matter a whole lot because they're out of business.
Yeah, well, that's true. Let's talk a little bit about things that don't have good answers today. And this is something that I'd love to see, comments in the chat. What is the single biggest identity problem that still does not have a satisfying answer right now, and why? So that's a question for the chat. We're trying to monitor it, kind of keep what's out there. So hopefully people will chime in on problems that they see that we just don't have a good answer for yet. For me, I think one of the ones that we are still grappling with is this whole thing around NHI, non-human identities. When we, think about how we're going to govern them and manage them, it feels like we're sort of fighting against the current right now, right? There's so many that are being introduced into our environments, and we're sort of playing whack-a-mole or maybe catch up with some of that stuff. So I'm curious, what do you think about the NHI environment and how that works from like a governance standpoint?
I think the first thing is like getting your arm around what is the scope of NHI in your environment. Obviously, we've always talked about service accounts, right? And I think all in all, organizations have a decent position in terms of having their arms around service accounts. There was a period of time where we'd say service accounts, like, do you have ones that were built in 1996 and you don't know what they do and you haven't changed the password? I think most organizations, it feels like, have gone after that problem and fixed it. But then where to go from there? Obviously Agentic AI is spinning up a new area for NHI, but there's a lot of other things like manufacturing systems and other systems within your organization. There's also, workload accounts. So getting your arms around, like, what are you going to manage? And then having a good visibility over kind of the discovery of what accounts are out there. What is your plan for keeping visibility? And one thing that annoys me is when, people discount the importance of visibility. I think visibility is the number one. After you identify the scope, which is a pen and paper exercise, how are you going to keep track of what accounts are in your environment? And even if you're not ready to automate the management of those accounts, knowing what's out there is important. What do you say?
Yeah, look, you can't protect what you don't know about. And so having that visibility is important. I think that's, being echoed in some of the comments I'm seeing here around, like, visibility and understanding what is actually in your environment. For sure, that is a big problem. But this is not a new problem, right? NHIs have existed in one form or another for decades, millennia, maybe, right? We've had service accounts, we've had privileged access accounts, we've had application accounts, right? All that stuff out there. But it's getting more and more important because now we've included this AI right into it. And that's exploding the number of these accounts. And it exposes a number of attack vectors because now you've got agents talking to agents and agents creating sub agents and all this kind of stuff. And so the governance becomes a real challenge for it. But I think you're right. I think it still starts with visibility. You can't protect what you don't know about. What do you think about the governance side of things? I think there has been some talks around like new frameworks and how do we approach it. My thought process is that a agentic AI sort of identity behaves a lot more similar to a human identity than to a service account, because it's not maybe going on a predictable pattern of like calling an API and doing this thing. It might do some of that, but it also might go off the rails and do other things, based on what the user has directed it to or whatever it decides, its instruction set wants it to do. So How do you feel about the governance side of things and handling things like consent and delegation and things like that?
Yeah, I think there's got to be policies in terms of what roles those accounts can play, what permissions they have. As much as you can enforce it, do it through automation in terms of, hey, people have to request those accounts and those accounts get maxed out at a certain level of capability or a certain level of entitlements. I just saw a question from Heidi in terms of how do you certify NHIs? So this gets into the governance. I think all NHIs need to be owned by a person. Now then you start running into the issue like, what if you have thousands of accounts all assigned to the same person? Well, how are you going to manage it? That's something you need to think through. That is the crux of the issue. It's like if you have thousands of accounts all assigned to one person and that one person doesn't know what they're doing, well, there's your problem.
What? Somebody reviewing something that they don't know anything about and just rubber stamping it? That would never
Yeah.
happen in the real world, Jim.
No, it would never happen for sure.
Yeah, I think the question around like certifying NHIs, and this is kind of where maybe my head is at right now. And look, this is a question where I don't have all the answers, and I think this is kind of a little bit of a group think here, trying to figure it out. But yeah, do you certify an NHI? And I like the idea of establishing accountability for any account to a human somewhere. And then that human needs to certify whatever that looks like in your environment to say, okay, yes, this is my account or this is my sub identity, whatever we want to call it. And it's doing things that are on my behalf. Do you think you can do that manually, or is, a proper identity governance administration tool really required for that to scale effectively? Or is it just a spreadsheet?
No, I don't think it's just a spreadsheet. I think IGA tools do a great job of, providing the automation, providing hopefully the user friendliness. I mean, presenting it in a way that the person can slice and dice the information, get to it from, launch from an email and go into a website, essentially audit and track all that information. So I think IGA has a role to play for sure. I think ultimately where it comes down to is if the data is not right, if you have thousands of accounts tying back to one person, the person may not be able to speak to it without enough descriptive information to say, hey, this account does this thing. And that person says, yes, well, we need to do that thing. I need to have that account. That's where it at least is a starting point.
So do we end up in a situation where we need an AI to keep track of the other AIs and run its own certification campaigns? I mean, I'm thinking of a scenario where at some point in the future, and maybe it's distant, maybe not too distant, is we're going to have, here's Jeff, and then here is the dozens, hundreds, thousands maybe of agentic AI things that are associated with me for all the different services I use, both for professional and for private. Trying to keep track of that is going to become impossible if I try to do that manually. So I need some sort of tool. And then it leads me to this idea of like, okay, well, I'll just have an AI certify my AI.
I mean, I think that's where things are heading, right? Whether we like it or not, the AI capabilities, they can do a lot of that. They can analyze data, they can put it in human friendly terms very quickly, and I see only more of that coming down the road. And because I can say one thing. So I've been in this field for over 20 years, and it's always been about do more with less. There's never been a time of do the same amount, but we're going to give you more people. That's never happened. I don't think it's ever going to happen. It's going to be do more with less, and AI is a great way to enable that.
Yeah, I mean, plus, the speed and the complexity of this. You've got some things. I see a comment in the chat around containers. That brings up the ephemerality, if that's a word, of these accounts, right? They might spin up and spin down in milliseconds. There is no way you can do that by hand. So you're going to need some automation to do that. And maybe it is a delegation of some sort of, custom agentic AI that is helping you keep track of those. But ultimately, I think there is a governance factor for humans to be able to say, okay, I need to take a look at this. And, maybe that's a new product space that comes out at some point. Maybe it's something that people build in Claude or Vibe Code over the weekend, whatever that looks like. But there will have to be something to help the human, because the human factor is still a big part of this. And we can't just keep blaming, humans to say, okay, well, this isn't working. Why aren't you doing your thing? If we're not giving the humans in this the appropriate tool sets or capabilities to deal with that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are that it's very hard to say when you spin up an account for a few seconds or milliseconds even to say, okay, we're going to tie that to a human and then have a human review that. What ultimately, why are you keeping the audit logs, right? Ultimately, those accounts tie back to, so let's say the platform is like a Terraform, right? Somebody owns that Terraform and is going to be able to say, yes, that is legitimate behavior. And to your point, to use AI as a tool to analyze the logs and look for anomalies, abnomalies, there you go, anomalies, and look for things that require special attention, or maybe it's just have the AI summarize like this all looks like legitimate behavior, and here's why. I can see that being very helpful.
So let me shift the conversation a little bit away from managing the AIs to around this idea of AI being leveraged for attacks and potentially for defense as well. We still see phishing as a very popular and effective way for people to get cracked and data to leak, right? And all this good stuff. This is something that's been a problem forever. I feel like we've sort of hit a little bit of a plateau where I think the most of the recent reports have it somewhere around 80% of breaches are tied to an identity. And the vast majority of those breaches are a compromised credential, which usually is done by phishing. And now we've got attackers who are, much more capable to be able to craft custom vishing, all the ishings that are out there.
All the issues, yeah.
And it used to be you could spot, at least in the US, right, the poorly, grammar English email to say that I haven't paid my tolls yet, and I need to click this link to pay for them. But they're getting much more sophisticated now and much more believable and realistic. What do we do about that?
So I think some of the age-old advice still stands. You shouldn't click links directly in emails, and that's the problem, is that you get emails that somehow get through all the email filters. They look like they're from the bank where you do your banking, and there's phishing attempts. And so I think the email filters need better AI capabilities that they can actually spot those. They look for links that don't look legitimate. But we're at a point in society right now where even legitimate emails, everybody seems to be suspicious. And it's those people who are not really able to understand, whether for whatever reason, not able to understand that, hey, I need to be suspicious. Or I get that text message that says, hey, how are you doing? It's probably you're not your old friend from high school. You have to have your guard up all the time. And so as an industry, we need to make sure that we're continuing to educate people who are not as wise as us in terms of this specific area. And the technology has to continue to evolve, because we had Joseph Carson on a recent episode and he talked about AI versus AI, and there's like these AI war games in terms of cybersecurity. And I just think that's going to continue to evolve. The deep fakes, for example, are getting better and better all the time.
Yeah, I mean, the original answer you kind of focused on was sort of like the written trail, right? Emails and things like that. But now we're in a scenario where you don't know if this is really me, right? It could be AI. I could be doing a deep fake. It could be synchronized to, lip sync and all that kind of stuff. That used to be sci-fi, where it was like, oh my gosh, you need to be Mission Impossible and Ethan Hunt and that whole team, right, to get that to pull off. Now you've got tools that are commercially available, widely available, that will let you be whoever you want to be, and that makes it much more difficult. There's this idea of like, okay, well, is it really Jim that I'm talking to, or is this AI Jim or open Jim Claw? Depending on how far back you go with us. But what do you think about that whole idea of how do we protect ourselves from deep fakes and things like that?
It's tough. I mean, I think there's a role for big tech to help us with this. I mean, I know OpenAI shut down their Sora model, but that only get you so far. I think once the cat's out of the bag, there's other folks who are going to try to reproduce it who might not take that kind of strong view. So I think there is a big tech role to play to not, if they're going to develop these tools, that they make sure they're used for good and that they block the use of not. I think also as as practitioners, we have to be looking for solutions that are going to help people. I don't know. I mean, when it comes to like identity verification tools, for example, they've got to be able to keep up with the technology in terms of identifying deep fakes. What are your thoughts?
I think it's probably a combination of things. I think it's like, look, AI is like any other tool in my mind. It'll be used for good and for bad, but the only thing we can count on is that it'll become more capable over time. Whether that capability is used for good or bad is really kind of depend on the hands that it's in. I would like to see some sort of, watermarking system or something to be able to tell, faked footage versus real footage. And I'm not even sure what that would even look like. I think like Adobe is working on something, Google is working on something, but it's not going to be effective unless like everybody's on board. And I mean, everybody around the globe has bought into the system. And so there's a lot of, danger from a ramification standpoint if we can't figure out what is real and what is fake. And certainly from an identity standpoint, how are we even supposed to do identity verification if I can't tell that the person on the other end of that line, that email, that video chat, that voice call, whatever it is, really is Jim or someone pretending to be Jim? Not that I would ever want anyone to do that.
Well, I think you and I and the folks on this meeting we're all wired to be suspicious. But I see AI videos all the time. I'm like, oh my gosh, is that real? Someone reels in a 16-foot shark into their fishing boat. Like, oh my gosh. So, I think we're getting to the point where we're doubting everything. But I think there's a lot of people out there who don't.
Yeah. I think there's also how it's going to be used. Your dog certainly agrees as well. Jeff Reich asks a good question in the chat. It's like, and can you design a gun that is only used for good? Well, define good and define gun, because that's, I think, where some of these, ethic, and moral decisions come into play for identity. And we've got an episode actually coming out in a couple of weeks talking about ethics and identity. But, that's another area too. It's like, how would you even govern that? And who decides what's good for the usage of a weapon or for whatever?
Yeah, we had this exact conversation yesterday as we record that episode. We all kind of raised to say stealing is bad, but what if you're stealing food for your starving family? It's not as bad, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, there's lots of shades of gray, and that's why I'm not a Sith. I'm a gray Jedi. Only Siths deal in absolutes. We've only got a couple of minutes left here, so let me turn it back over to a lighter note as we tend to end these episodes. If you had to sum up the entire identity and access management industry, community, whatever you want to call it, into a single bumper sticker, what does it say?
Stuff happens.
And you're censoring the stuff.
Yeah. That's it.
I think I would have something like, my other vehicle is, some well-known IGA or privileged access management or something like that, on top of the junker that I'm driving around, something like that. Do you have any other ideas on other bumper stickers? Maybe, people want to drop them in the chat. We can kind of read through them. But
how about Jeff Reich as my co-pilot?
Yeah, that could be another one. Whether you get there or not, debatable, but you will be entertained the entire way that you're going there. All right, let's see. We got 2 minutes left. I don't want to go over our mark, but let me just go ahead and say thank you, everybody, for being part of this. Happy Identity Management Day, Jim, and everyone in the chat. If you like this style of conversation when it comes to podcasting, this is what we do every week. Commercial free, and idacpodcast.com. Subscribe, do all those fun things. And Jeff, when you're ready, I can play my outro and we can get things going and move on to the next one. So thanks everybody for watching and or listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.